everyone. Welcome. My name is Carmen Jimenez from One Young World. I would first like to welcome the audience here on site at the ferry and our digital audience for tuning in. Just a quick reminder that at the end of the session, there will be some time for questions. For those of you here on site, you can raise your hand and we will come to you with a microphone. For those of you who are joining digitally, you will find a code on screen that you will be able to put in slido.com when you submit your questions. And with no further ado, I would like to introduce the next session, Decarbonizing Global Supply Chains.
Sustainability is a mindset. It's an attitude and it's a conviction.
It's, I think, very normal to question if what we're doing in our everyday life has a positive impact on the world.
The BMW Group has a special responsibility to follow ideas for sustainability.
Für mich ist Nachhaltigkeit persönlich ein sehr wichtiges Anliegen und deshalb bin ich sehr dankbar, dass ich in meinem beruflichen Umfeld tatsächlich daran arbeiten kann.
Sustainability is nothing new. It's about rethinking what you use and how you use it.
Every time we develop something new, a new material, we have to think whether it's sustainable, what's the carbon footprint, is it recyclable at the end of the life?
I think it's important to get these innovations ready for the road so people can really rely on this technology, so we will have our customers to lead their lives in a more sustainable way.
Deutlich weniger Konsum, deutlich mehr Qualität und weniger Wegwerfgesellschaft.
I can actually be part of this transformation. It really gives my work purpose. Even if I change something super small, the impact is pretty big because you can multiply it by 2 million cars. If you sum that up, that's pretty impressive.
I personally truly believe that sustainability is our leading topic in the future.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, both here in person and virtually. My name is Justus Löbler. I'm going to host the session here this afternoon. Let me start by extending a big thank you to the team, both at One Young World and at Extreme Hangouts, for hosting us here this afternoon. We have an amazing panel lined up that will not only talk about decarbonization of global supply chains, but will also share their personal experience as young leaders in their respective fields and how they have been driving climate action over the past few years. But before we get the panel on stage, I would like to introduce a keynote speaker that will share his thoughts on BMW's sustainability strategy, Dr. Thomas Becker, who is Vice President of Corporate Strategy, Sustainability and Mobility. Thomas is a true COP veteran. He joined his first Conference of the Parties in 2008 in Poznan, Poland. He has been 12 years leading our governmental affairs department, working with stakeholders around the globe in discussing policy option and business action in driving sustainability, and has since October 2019 led our sustainability strategy. It's a real privilege to have you here today and hear all your thoughts on sustainability strategy and how young leaders can shape that in big companies. Thomas Becker.
Thank you so much, Justus, and also from my side, really thank you to the organizers and everybody who has been part of bringing about this event. So, sustainability, when in the old days, if you like, when BMW established the first sustainability, or as it was called then, environmental manager in the early 70s, was about production. It was about water consumption, electricity consumption, emissions from paint shops, logistics, etc. It then became an issue of tailpipe emissions, harmful substances coming out of the car during its use, and about reducing CO2 impact with new technologies. All of that is now changing a big deal, as you all know, because, to put it into some numbers, the impact that we are responsible for is on the move. So when we redesigned our entire CO2 abatement strategy and our strategy for complying with the requirements of the Paris Agreement 2 years ago, we firstly really analyzed where does the CO2 come from, and then derived a strategy which is now being implemented, also with roles being played by some of the colleagues which you are going to listen to in a moment. So, without wanting to throwing out too many figures, there are 3 of them, or 6 overall. 2019, the average car we have been building had a CO2 footprint of 52 tons over its life. To put that into perspective, an average European will emit 2 tons of CO2 per year on the road. So this is the number of years that, so to speak, go into a car. In 2019, 10 tons of CO2 were embedded in the parts we purchase. So the car has been driving, if you like, the equivalent of 4 to 5 years before we put it together. Then you have something between 0.5 and 1 ton of CO2 in our own production. That's the tiniest bit of it all, but one which is about our credibility, about our direct responsibility. And a colleague of mine, Philippa, will talk a little bit about that, what that means in practice, I think. And then we had more than 40 tons in the use phase. When people drive around, including not only the tailpipe emissions, but also a correction factor according to the SBTI logic, the Science-Based Target Initiative logic. We include the footprint of energy generation, we include a correction factor for real-life emissions, we include the CO2 footprint of the refineries, etc. So all of that taken together is 40 tons. 10, 1, 40, 42, 45. Those were the old days. If you take an electric vehicle like the ones we are launching now, or the electric Mini, or all the other things that we are selling, the equation is totally different. It would be 21 and then 2 to 20, depending on the electricity mix that you have as a customer. So having said that, if you look at the overall tons of CO2 BMW is responsible for, even before 2030, a bigger part of that will come from the parts that we use for our cars than comes out of the exhaust pipe. So the focus of our footprint is hugely shifting. And that means that Paris compliance for a car maker increasingly, apart from increasing the share of electric vehicles, which is obvious and which everybody is discussing here, is about getting the CO2 out of your supply chains. And we need to get down from 10 tons on average to 8 on average. And we need to make up for the increase that would occur from electrification due to the very high energy consumption of battery cell production. This is why we have been negotiating with all our battery cell suppliers, for example, to only use renewable energies when supplying BMW. And this applies to a Chinese cell manufacturer who supplies BMW in China from China, exactly the same as a European manufacturer of battery cells supplying BMW in Germany. It's the same policy wherever you go. But that won't be enough. With all the substitution of electricity, renewables instead of coal and gas, etc., with all the discussions, and there are many, and they are successful, with, for example, our aluminum supplies to use hydropower instead of coal power, it will only get us to about half the level of reduction that we need. The rest is about circularity, is about replacing virgin material by secondary material. Because in the case of aluminum, the music, as the German saying is, the music plays in the first phases of the manufacturing process, which are highly energy intense. So by going for secondary material, you save that. So we need both. We need renewable energy combined with secondary material. And this vehicle which you see here, which we have been showing on the Munich Motor Show and which we are also having here at the Sustainable Innovation Forum, is a vehicle that demonstrates that 100% renewable recycled material is possible. You can build a car without having to use any virgin material. Technically, it's doable. The challenge that we are facing is availability of material, sufficient volume, at the right quality, at the right price. And just to illustrate this with an example from aluminum, we have parts in our vehicles which you can buy today, which are more than 50% recycled aluminum. It's cast aluminum parts. But the recycled aluminum that goes in there comes from industrial processes. It has never been in the hands of a customer. It's residue from production. This has the right purity, the right quality for that purpose. Aluminum that comes out of a shredder, in very many cases, has tiny contaminations of copper. And more than 1% of copper in aluminum means it is not corrosion resistant anymore. So you can forget it for using it in a car. So the challenge out there is get better recycled material out of the recycling processes. And this is why we are working with very many companies around the globe and scientists in order to ramp up the availability of secondary material. So much about the content. But the other part of this is about processes. And we have a supply chain with thousands of companies. There is no more complex supply chain than the supply chain of a car. And it is global by nature. So can you just say, I as a company, as BMW, I order everybody to change their processes? No, you can't. You have highly competent supply companies, many of which have ambitious sustainability agendas themselves. We have policies who are also pushing many of the sectors which supply us, steel, aluminum, chemical industry, to decarbonize. So it's all about collaboration and dialogue. It's about properly reaching out and discussing, okay, how can a realistic trajectory, for example, look like to bring down the footprint of steel? You can talk a lot about perfect final situations like all steel being made with purely green hydrogen. But we need to get on a trajectory downwards now, and we will need to deliver on that next year and the year after that, and not only in 2040 or 2050. And this means to really in-depth work with our suppliers, discuss what is feasible, and to be accountable for the results. A big challenge in decarbonizing supply chains is to be able to demonstrate that what you say is actually what you do. It is easy to claim we will be 100% CO2 neutral in whichever year. But if you want to demonstrate year by year how much you have been improving, you need data that is reliable. So the aforementioned example of our battery suppliers is the relatively easy part. They can demonstrate where does the electricity come from. Here's the contract. It can be proved, it can be checked, it can be audited. But what do you do with a supply chain which is of a complex component, which is made of a dozen subcomponents, which are made of many parts who come from very different raw material sources? You need transparency. You need a digital mechanism whereby you can aggregate CO2 footprints in a way that is really reliable and transparent. And this is a challenge ahead of us, and another colleague of mine will later on also, he's an expert, he's right now doing this. And the guys who are going to be on this podium now, the BMW people who are here with us, they all make a contribution to that. So of a niche role of a sustainability manager into one of many aspects that matter when you purchase a part, when you design a new door handle, when you think about the right sales model. So the future is not about sustainability being just a strategy or just a specialist role. Sustainability in bringing down the impact of a complete value chain is about integrating it into each and every aspect of the decisions which influence them. And with that, I do thank you very much for your attention to this brief intro, and I really look forward to the discussion with people who actually get the things done. So thank you very much for that, and good luck for the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Thomas. And as I said earlier, we have a really amazing global panel, which we now have about 40 minutes to discuss sustainability in global supply chain. Let me just briefly introduce you, and then we can go through and you can share some thoughts on the project you're doing. We have Philippa, who is a supplier quality manager at the BMW Group mini plant in Oxford. We have Vaku, who recently graduated from the University of Oxford looking at lithium supply. We have Anna, who is with Econsense and leading their environmental sustainability there. We have Nasha, who is co-founder and director of Sustainability Without Borders. I'm not going to try to pronounce that in Spanish. We do have Isabella, who is founder and president of Zeus Chile. And to both of you, I'm really glad that we have you here as representatives from Argentina and Chile to have that discussion with us. And last but not least, we have Philip Lashinsky, who is leading the circular economy use case at Catena X. And I'm definitely going to ask what that means in a moment. But can I start with you, Anna? After this session, you're going to run off to a C-level roundtable in the Blue Zone. So how, from your perspective in Ecosense, how are you driving big industries, very senior executives, to become more sustainable in their processes?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, maybe to those of you who don't know, Econsense is the German Business Sustainability Network. We have 40 corporate members. How I drive the discussion, first of all, I think Econsense is providing a venue for discussion because, as Mr. Becker just pointed out, all of the big companies are now facing roughly the same challenges, supply chain decarbonization, circularity, moving nature at the center of their sustainability strategies. So we provide a venue for peer learning. And then also what my role is I think to critically question what companies are doing, whether they're doing it fast enough, and consider all the aspects necessary. And I think there's certainly still a long way to go, especially when we talk about circularity and putting nature and biodiversity at the core of what business is doing.
Isabella, can I come to you next, because you are taking, with your NGO that you founded, an approach of trying to give young people a voice in these big conversations on sustainability. How has that worked out for you so far?
Yeah, well, thanks. First of all, thanks for the invitation and the possibility to talk here about our project and what are we doing in Chile. As you mentioned, my NGO called Zeus Chile is a network of young people trying to involve on public policies, because we believe that young people must be part of the decision-making processes from the beginning and to the end. So related to that, we have been pushing different projects related to empower and create capacities in young people, because we don't want the young people participating in these spaces because they are young, just because they are young, but because they can, because they know, because they can give some perspective or another perspective for the public policies. So in particular, we have been developing a training related to circular economy. We are the first free training in Chile for young people on this topic. So that is huge, because we don't have spaces in this specific topic, but in general we don't have spaces for young people, for the training of young people, for creating capacities for young people. So we have been working on that and so many other topics, but because we believe that we must create those capacities, because if we want youth participating in the different processes, we need these young people be prepared for that. And the creation of capacity must be the fundamental point of that.
No. Philip, can I come to you next? Because you're lead of circular economy at Catena X. Maybe you can speak a bit about what Catena X is. But can I also ask you how much of that type of education that Isabella was referring to do you have to do in your everyday job to explain people what circular economy actually is?
Yeah, hi, I'm Philip, I'm with Catena X, and just to briefly introduce what Catena X is all about, we're a big consortia in Germany currently, but going to be in Europe and globally, and we are looking at building up a data-driven value chain. So what Dr. Becker just said is we have to really connect all the players, because it's not only about BMW and making change within sustainability and especially circular economy. We will not be able to do that by ourselves. So the name of the game for us is networks and platforms and data, and doing that data-driven. So that's what Catena X is all about. And coming back to the question about circular economy and education, I actually would like to take that course myself, because I believe that would be pretty helpful for me too. I'm learning every day, and we have to educate ourselves every day. We have to educate young people. We have to educate everyone in our society on circular economy. It's not about only decarbonization. It's not only about water consumption, or it's a holistic view when you look at circular economy, and education is key, because when looking at sustainability, you have to be sustainable in terms of economical, ecological, and social, and that's why education is key here, and I'm really happy to be here today.
Marco, can I just ask you, you recently graduated from the University of Oxford with distinction. You looked at more sustainable lithium mining in the supply chain. You're really at the forefront of building that knowledge that we're speaking about here. So how did you choose that topic for the key topic of your master thesis?
Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me. That's a really good question. I think throughout my course, we focused a lot on like renewable energy transitioning to this, which is great. We look at reducing CO2, but the problem is that renewable energy is polluting in other ways. We use water consumption. They're a threat to biodiversity, human rights. Where is the metal coming from? We forget to ask that question. The electricity isn't coming from nowhere, right? So to me, this was a massive, complex element within the supply chain, basically like the biggest puzzle for me that I wanted to focus on. And so I wanted to look at how do we ensure that the transition to renewable energy or renewable technology in reducing CO2 doesn't cause other problems, and to ensure that that is done in a just way.
So Nasha, you're probably painfully aware where these materials that we so desperately need for the green transition come from, namely from Argentina, in part at least. And you have not only been looking at the environmental impact, but also at the social impact of what that mining does to the community. So how have you been seeing that, how you have engaged with people who work in the mining industry there as well?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to talk about. I think, as it was said before, sustainability is a mindset. And as a mindset, you have to keep in count profit, people, and planet, right? You cannot only look at profit, or only look at planet, or only look at people itself. And when you look at planet, it's not only about decarbonizing our world. I lead an NGO dedicated to climate change. And sometimes we push our message to say, hey, we need to curb down all the CO2 emissions, which is, of course, is what we need to do to be for the target of 1.5 within reach. Especially we are now doing COP26, and that's the big goal we all have to address. But it's not only about carbon, right? Because when you try to look at other aspects of sustainability, you also have biodiversity loss, you also have water consumption, water footprint, etc., etc. So you need a really broad conscious about all the impacts you have on the road of making a product or giving a service. And for us, being a journey to learn, for example, in the case of lithium, that you have 80% of the reservoirs between Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. And it can be done in a way that is actually not good for people. So you have to be aware of what can cause to people, right? in sometimes mining in other parts of the country had a huge impact on people, because a company comes and have an economic activity, and people from regional, indigenous, or just small communities there, all the young people go to work to the mining. They use a lot of natural resources. Sometimes they are not well managed. You have negative impacts of contamination, etc. And also, if the company goes after, you have like what we call a ghost city after, because there is no more jobs, and some young people already moved from the communities, they lost their culture, etc. So when we talk about decarbonizing our economy, we have to take people in all the process and in the count to see how can we do things better. What kind of data do we need? What kind of framework do we need to address all the supply chain? Can we do it in another way? And those are sometimes uncomfortable questions, and we have to do, because it extends the reach of the company, right? It goes beyond to the suppliers, it goes beyond and beyond. So I believe that we are all here to broaden our consciousness and to take into account that we do not only address profit, but also people and also planet.
And Philippa, let me come to you next, because to quote two US presidents, the buck stops with you. You are in the plant, you are where the change actually happens. So what has been your experience with, doing a regular day-to-day job while at the same time trying to make this green transformation happen? I know you've been involved in, the mini electric being built at Oxford and other things, but maybe you can share a little bit of your experience from the plant.
Yes, thank you. And just to clarify, so I'm from Plant Oxford, where we manufacture the minis. And in terms of our day-to-day, primarily we're driven by building cars on time, on cost, to the right quality. Every 60 seconds, a mini rolls off the assembly line. What's fantastic is to hear that BMW have such ambitious sustainability goals, as outlined by Dr. Becker. So the role I play is, how do we in manufacturing play our role? How do we help the business achieve these goals? It is challenging, but what we need to ensure is that we're manufacturing vehicles in a responsible manner. So we still want to build cars to the correct quality on time, but ensuring that we are not having an impact in other manners. Sustainability, like you were saying, Nasha, is a mindset. It's not an alternative mindset. It needs to become part of our everyday thinking.
So, very important point here also on data, I think, and Nasha, you have alluded to that as well, trying to understand what the real impact is. So Philip, maybe question in your direction, how can Catena X help us also with understanding throughout the supply chain the actual environmental impact that we have? Because that will be crucial in order to make the right strategic decisions to bring that footprint down.
Exactly. First of all, I believe it's focusing on the supply chain. We have to broaden our view. We have to look at the whole value chain, because at the end of the life cycle, we should look at loops and closing that loop and really looking at circular economy. So let's include that end of the life cycle phase within our discussion, and using that data. And what Catena X can actually do is what Dr. Becker just said is having real, valuable, trustworthy data shared with low barriers so that you can measure, but we can't stop just there. We have to use that data in order to really make an impact. So giving partners within our supply chain the real data, what's for instance in a high voltage battery, so the battery of the electric mini, to make better decisions rather to recycle or reuse. Because when you look at just carbonization, you might say, well, don't recycle because that could be high intense on carbon. But looking at other factors in terms of sustainability, it might be the better decision to go to. And that's just one case. Or having real dismantling factories here for cars and powered by digital twins and data, emphasizing that recycling will be part of our everyday supply or value chain. We will be building cars out of cars, and this will only be possible in a real sustainable manner if we have networks like Catena X and use data. So that's what we have to do in order, and that's where we, Catena-X can actually be helpful here.
Yeah. So Anna, we've identified data as one of the crucial ingredients to move this forward. You're speaking to a lot of companies. What other kind of, key aspects that are currently a little bit barriers that we have to work on to move this forward more quickly have you identified through talking to senior executives across the German industry?
Yeah, I would actually like to start by something that companies probably don't really talk about that much, but I think is a priority, is to really rethink as a first step radically how do I provide value as a company, because I think that's at the outset of decarbonizing your supply chain, to really rethink what are the products that I offer and what are the services that I offer, and then you go from there and start to decarbonize your supply chain from there. But I'm often hearing discussions where this first step is actually not being done, so just discussing this from the status quo. One of the aspects that we at eConsense have tackled also this year is cross-sectoral collaboration, so between different companies of different sectors to really decarbonize and to also move circular economy forward. There's some examples also at BMW where you do this in order to increase the secondary material share for your cars, but I think that is a major hurdle. So speaking to different companies, but also speaking to your suppliers. So in Germany, there's a study that says that only 17%, so every fifth company knows about the emissions of their direct suppliers, and that's really tier one. And as Dr. Becker said, I mean, automotive and all of the others, there's tier 2 to, I don't know, tier 20. So I think we're not even there with tier 1. So I think that's going to be something that you can maybe address with Catena-X, and that's a major challenge, I believe.
Well, Isabella, you also spoke about this educational piece, and hearing these numbers from Anna, what do you think, young leaders, what type of role can we play in educating the economy, the industry, and other senior executives in what type of decisions they have to make and what type of changes have to be addressed?
Well, I think that our role as young people or young leaders, or however you want to say to that, through education, we need to look for changes, for change the vision of how we have been developing in our economies, not just in the global south, that is where I came from, but in here, in countries like from Europe or the US, for example, because when you are in Latin America or in other regions, you know that you are the place where came from the materials for this kind of economies, So as Nacho said, lithium, for example, it is a really good example. In Chile, copper and lithium is a huge problem in the communities, in indigenous people or in our territories, because that is the way that in the other side of the world it is they have been developing, So I think our role here is to look for other alternatives. Circular economy is one way, but I don't think that is the way. I think we have many solutions in many ways, and we need to push and to look for them, because this is climate crisis. It is a complex problem and a multidimensional problem, and it won't be, the solution is not just one, and we need to push for many of them, because climate crisis is a social crisis, is a health crisis, is a environmental or ecological crisis too. So we don't need just to decarbonize our economies. We need to make restoration or protect our ecosystems. So education is key for that, and we need to push, and we need to collaborate for that, and we need to educate ourselves, but other generations too, and other parts of society, and for me, for that it is so important spaces like COP26, because you put in one place all people from all over the world to discuss and to have different negotiations focus in one agreement, in a one worldwide agreement. So we need each other to do that and to save the planet. That is our main goal in this moment.
Yeah. Well, Wako, let me bring you in here for a moment, because in your master thesis you looked actually at alternatives for lithium sourcing specifically, and also at addressing the issue of that being partially mined in the global south with all the aspects that we discussed. So what can you tell us about alternatives of lithium sourcing, and being aware that we desperately need lithium to build these batteries that we need for the green transitions?
So yeah, as mentioned, lithium is currently mostly mined in Chile and in the Andes Triangle, so Bolivia, Argentina. And there is this idea within the EU Commission, for example, that localizing lithium in Europe and the UK, for example, Cornwall, is more sustainable. So this is, for example, through direct lithium extraction, which uses less land, less water consumption, and a lot of this can be done because we have lots of money, right? We can put a lot of money into innovating a lot of these technologies. But when we look at localizing the supply chain, my question was, there is a risk of being selfish. There is a risk of focusing on your own area, cleaning your own area, making it green. But what about Chile then? If we make the supply chain in the UK and in Europe, what happens to the communities in Chile that needed that job? And BMW is involved in this great project, which I mentioned, called Cobalt for Development. And essentially, what they focus on is when you shift your supply chain to make it sustainable, so you don't want to be connected to all of these problems in the global south, and so you want to create a clean mine in the global north. Well, then what do? Leave the other countries without anything? So what they do is they don't leave. So in this case, DRC, they don't leave DRC without it, just leaving them behind, but focusing on making the development there sustainable, helping them to make it sustainable, giving them other revenue paths, like bread making, beekeeping, all of these things, to then make the supply chain, the local supply chain in the UK, and then you can come back to it. You can always support the developing countries while localizing. So I was looking at, localizing is helpful in some ways, but also damaging in others if we don't do it right. So I was looking at how do you localize while helping developing countries and not leaving them rogue.
Nasha, what is your thought on this? Would your dream be all of these mining companies going out and being gone, or what type of engagement would you envision with them in order to make this positive change happen?
Well, I think we need a revolution on the way we think. We usually think short term, right? And it's been proven that we need long-term strategies. And when you think about a country like Argentina, you have 40% of the people right now are poor, and more than 50% of the childs are poor. So that means that 1 and 2 childs right now are going to lack access of good education or water system, etc. So definitely jobs you need jobs in our countries to develop in a sustainable way. And for that you need green industries, industries that think in long term, that can have that are responsible in all the supply chains, taking into account people and planet and etc. So of course you need development. And also, as our NGO says, even if we think locally or in a country, nature and planet do not understand borders. So if you emit carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you are going to breathe it anywhere in the world, right? So we have to start thinking without borders. I think that is only one planet, and how are we going to make sustainable industries, sustainable economies that actually with a long-term strategy, politically align with NGOs and public sector and the NGO, everyone on the same table, thinking that we need to define how the future we want it to look like, because we're talking about really the extinction of humanity, if you want, because definitely we're doing such a mess with our planet that we are not going to have the same opportunities as a generation to come to power in the next decade, and we are definitely not giving the same opportunities of those who are born today. So we need to rethink, to think big, to think in long term. We need everyone on the same table to talk about those plans and data from scientists, and to really think how we are going to define sustainable development for the next decades.
Let us talk for a moment about the leadership that is necessary in order to make these changes happen. Philippa, let's start with you. Where do you take the courage, the motivation from to have these conversations and challenge the ways things are currently set up? And what would be kind of your key asks towards your manager in order to make these process changes happen that we just spoke about?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's creating the framework and being encouraged to be bold, and also creating a platform where you can challenge the norm. So just because we have a set process, that doesn't mean it's right. And what we require from BMW and what BMW are delivering on is creating this platform where we're entitled to challenge for a positive change. And I think that's where we are responsible as a manufacturer to lead by example, where sustainability needs to become a target that we measure every day. And I've had a great discussion with Philip this morning that that's complex, and how do you measure that? It is a complex issue, but we need to tackle it head on and lead by example. So for example, when it's everyday decisions, I mean, there's on the larger scale, the electric Mini, we demonstrated we were the first vehicle manufacturer to integrate an electric vehicle into an existing combustion line. In Oxford, we're challenged with the oldest vehicle plant in the world still manufacturing. That brings logistical difficulties in an old building, but we've demonstrated as possible we didn't need to fill a field with concrete to build an entirely dedicated assembly line to manufacture the electric Mini. We incorporated it into our assembly line. We collaborated, we used innovation, and we demonstrate that it's possible. But there's more that we can do on an everyday level. I was explaining to Dr. Becker that, for example, in my role, so supplier quality, if we find defective parts, the original choice was organise a courier to send them back to the supplier for them to sort out, or we scrap and recycle. There's more we can do, and that shouldn't be the go-to decision, and that's where I feel my role is to start challenging that. We can make the good parts, we can rework them so they can be utilised and still maintain. We will still manufacture good cars, but we're reducing the carbon impact that we have by just using a little bit more thought, a bit more time, and starting to create change.
Anna, how do you see this dualism of leaders taking action kind of bottom up, while at the same time, of course, we also see a lot of strategy changes in corporations who want to take more care of sustainability. How do you think one can go about most efficiently in bringing these two together to make real change happen?
Yeah, I think it's quite exciting, actually. I mean, I started my professional career like 2 years ago, so it's not that long of a time that I worked with companies, but even in that time, this has been quite a dynamic space, seeing that sustainability has been like a philanthropic add-on to business, and now it's really moved center stage. A lot of CEOs, not just German CEOs, are here and talking about climate change being the sponsor of their organization's climate strategy. I think it's a really dynamic sphere, and at the same time, we also heard that yesterday, that a lot of employees, but also new recruits are asking companies to be more sustainable. So we have a lot of grassroots organizations now in companies that ask their leaders to be more sustainable. So I think one way to bridge that gap is open communication. We need to be a little more transparent, I think, on what companies do in their sustainability strategies, and also anchoring sustainability in the governance structure. So a lot of companies now are talking about linking pay, executive pay, boardroom pay, but also all employees pay to climate targets. And I think that's an important lever. Also, for example, carbon shadow pricing. So really setting an internal price for carbon that will guide investment decisions. That's something that every employee will feel in the procurement, in the design phase, in marketing. So I think we need those governance instruments to really take sustainability anchoring in the organization to a next level.
And Isabella, what role does the political sphere play in all of this? I mean, you obviously have big political changes coming about in Chile at the moment. How do you try to anchor that sustainability governance that Anna spoke about into also the policy and the governance processes in Chile for the future?
Well, I think that is general, not just in Chile. We are living a huge moment related to all the decisions in our way. I mean, I think the best example of that, of the power of our decisions, when we talk about elections or to elect some presidents or different decision makers, it is the case of the U.S. and how the past government of the U.S. was not part of the Paris Agreement and the negotiation, and how the scenario changed in this COP because of the change of the government. So that is the kind of decision that are in our hands when we took a pen and we mark our vote. So in Chile, we're living a huge moment. I think it is a milestone year for us. We're living a constitutional process. We are writing a new constitution by a national assembly. It means 155 people elected to write our constitution, citizens like us in the country. So that is huge for us. That is the first time in our history, and we have the possibility to write a new constitution in a climate crisis, in the peak of a climate crisis at this moment, you know, and the possibility to write an ecological constitution that can create a pathway to start a different way to develop as a country, and that is huge. And related to that, we're living elections in a couple of days, so we will voting for 4 or 5 people in our paper, but we are voting for thousands of decisions that these people will be making in some days, in some months, and that is our power right now. When someone asks me how we can or what we can do as a citizen, as a person, as an individual person, and I always say to vote. I mean, that is our huge act of revolution right now. That is our way to choose people that are committed with our climate and ecological crisis. So we can choose them, and we must choose very, very well, because when we choose them wrong, things like the Paris Agreement now moving forward is what is happening. So I mean, that is our way to do something as an individual person. Of course, articulation and cooperation, as working in some place or an NGO or an initiative. Of course, that are things that we can do in a collective way, but as an individual way, we can choose them. We can choose the people who are making the decisions, and we want better decisions.
Gosh, I could just keep asking you questions and questions. You have so many incredible stories to share on this panel, but I think it's probably time to give a bit Q&A time for the audience here in the room and also digitally. Triaza, I know you've been following what's going on online. I know there are a lot of people watching online as well. Are there any questions coming in that you would like to bring up to the podium? And I would then also ask in a moment to have a microphone in the room, I think, which we do have to have some questions here. But maybe let's start with Triaza, who is monitoring the digital community.
Thank you. Yes, we're getting some great questions and interactions with the online audience. One that came in from the Ukraine, from Stefan, was what system or platform do you use to track CO2 in the supply chains?
Well, maybe Philip, you can talk a little bit about the status quo, where we are, and what the problems of that are, and where we will be moving to in the future.
I mean, there are several systems out there to track or estimate mainly CO2 for companies or for whole supply chains or for individuals like me. What we are doing as an automotive industry is, and as a company itself, we are working on standards, because that's key in that discussion, because you've got to be comparable. That's something we are currently doing. It's important to hold ourselves accountable and be held accountable by others. So that's an important topic here. As I mentioned, Cathena X, and Dr. Becker mentioned it as well, we are trying to set up Cathena X and having solutions on that platform going live by next year, that really be able to calculate and estimate and putting in real CO2 data in the Cathena X network. So that's our part of the solution, but it's all about discussion of standards. And we as young people, and that's important, I believe here, we have to help ourselves, and we have to help our management and partners accountable here, and stay angry, to quote another US president. So we're talking about systems and data. That's important. We have to push those standards, and we have to push those systems. But we as young leaders and young people, we have to really stay angry and look at those people to really look at the 1.5 degree goal we are having all.
Marco, can I just come to you for a moment before we go back to the question and ask you what role you felt throughout the research that you've done that academia can play with helping to understand the CO2 footprint, but other sustainability indices as well? What have you come across?
So I think before we were talking about, that this is a very complex issue, but then leaders actually need to simplify this in order to drive for a solution. So we have this paradox of juggling with complex problems, trying to simplify it, and then simplifying also means filtering things out, losing things, right? So I think that within the nuances that have to be maintained when you simplify it, academia plays a massive role, because that's an area where we can really understand and criticize and be skeptical of things, but we also remember that there is a space where we need to start making a decision. And so academia has this space of being able to, a thinking ground, and so that we can understand things properly, so that we can make a transition carefully. So that, we're not only having complex problems and simple solutions, but we have that in between too.
Right. Teresa, back to you. What's happening in the online community?
Hello? Oh, it's back. To go over to the US, Sophia asks, how can citizens encourage their local governments to transition to new and sustainable transport systems?
Nasha, maybe a question for you, working with local communities to start with?
Yes, of course. So I work leading an NGO, which means I am part of the third sector. But anyone can do a change. It doesn't matter if you work for the private sector, for the public sector, for your own. And I think the first thing is we need to recognize ourselves as consumers, but also as citizens, as you said. We are not only consumers. We are more than consumers, okay? Of course. When we choose what kind of products we're going to buy, of course, there is an impact related to those products and services. But also when you vote and when you think and when we relate to others. And I think that is at the heart of the transition we need, to see that we are consumers, but more than that, we are citizens. And we need to talk with our policy-making boards in our cities. In my case, for example, we organized the Regional Conference of Youth for Latin America and the Caribbean. You can go online and check it. We have a statement, and we have more than 40,000 signatures. And it's something, a small initiative that just came for people talking to each other and saying, hey, do you know what? We have the same problem. Let's find if we can have a common solution too. And when you have an idea or a common solution, just with a positive talking, bring it to your head of states, to the governors, or maybe locally, and see if you can see some change on the road.
Very good. Trias, I'm going to come back to you in a minute, definitely, but just wanted to see whether there are any questions in the audience here in the room in presence before we move on. Right over there.
Hiya, thank you very much for the talk. It's been very interesting. I have a question on the economics of changing from a fossil fuel supply chain to more of a renewable source of energy. Open to everyone on the panel on how that affects prices in cars and prices in supply and so on.
Yeah. Anna, maybe for you to have a high-level view on this, what is your feeling in the conversations you are having with large organizations? How big of a role does money play in this, and how much of investment is needed? And how much is that also a barrier to making this change happen?
Yeah, I think I will be also speaking about finance on the next panel, because I think a lot of CEOs still cite that as, or the lack of financial resources as a major barrier to implementing sustainability strategies, because they also are confronted with investors who want to reduce the climate risk they hold in their portfolio, and therefore they will also penalize companies even if they have really short-term dents on profitability. So I think there's kind of a mismatch still there. And in terms of the economics of renewable or decarbonized versus fossil fuel supply chains, I think the economics are not right yet. I think you can probably speak to that even more, because secondary materials, we heard one challenge is availability and high quality, but also having a higher price tag as of now than sort of the normal conservative way. And that's probably because the economics and the price signals are not right yet, because if you really speak about full cost, then it cannot be the case that sustainable materials, recycled materials are more expensive than virgin materials. But I think you said it yesterday, it's still the case. So I think we need to, and that's maybe something we can achieve here, speak about carbon pricing and really reflecting the true cost of fossil fuel-derived production.
Philippa, can I also come to you, because I really would like to ask you, representing Plant Oxford, who of course employs thousands of people, with the people working there, how big is the concern that this sustainability changes might have a negative economic impact on their lives, and what can we do more to keep them with us if we do these changes?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think too often with sustainability, we're very much focusing on the product, and it's a much bigger picture than that. So if we focus on the product, as if I'm an associate working at Plant Oxford, I'll think, okay, does that mean the electric minis, we're going to build them in larger volume, will they then move to China? And what does that mean to me? And that is where our communication is critical. The communication needs to be well targeted. It needs to focus on, it's not just about the product. And another great discussion with Philip earlier was what we should sell it as. Plant Oxford, this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that we can be a key player in sustainability. In the past, it has been very cost-led, which may lead to decisions about moving production to China. We are seeing a shift in that, where sustainability is becoming a critical element in decision-making. So my message to associates at Plant Oxford would be, let's demonstrate our ability to become a sustainable vehicle manufacturer to give us a stronghold in BMW.
Yeah. We're coming towards the end of the time here, but Triasa, maybe you want to share some more thoughts that you've been seeing online before we close the discussion.
Sorry, my screen was after freezing. We're back. Yes, one quick question to finish on was, is there any new technology coming out for energy storage?
Oh, wow, energy storage question. Who would like to take that?
Well, I would say that I don't know if someone has the answer, and I think it's a big question, how we are going to storage energy. I think there is a revolution coming, and so you have to welcome the doors for innovation, and especially young people can help a little bit with innovation and thinking out of the box. So when you have companies and the public sector investing in research, and that's something important, and to have young people in the conversation so they can think out of the box and only coming with technology but also process and practices that can actually help us to understand that energy is everywhere. We just need to understand better ways to use it and store and and give back to the nature and ecosystems.
Can I add something? Not my area, but just to put an eye on that, green hydrogen is something that in Chile is huge. But when we are talking about new technologies, we must to put in the center of the discussion just transition, because it is not just to create new technologies and new ways to do something, but we need to think in how in the way that we do that, and just transition must be the center of the discussion when we are living a climate crisis like this.
Yeah. Well, really ambitious thought there to end on. Thank you so much, Philippa, Vako, Anna, Nasha, Isabella, and Philip for being on the panel here today. Thank you so much for joining in person and also digitally. 8,000 to 10,000 people joining digitally for this session, I was told. Thank you so much and have a good afternoon. Enjoy the rest of COP26.
Thank you all, and thank you to this wonderful panel for such an insightful conversation and sharing your views on decarbonizing and sustainability as a whole. Thank you to our audience for submitting your questions. I would highly recommend to stick around, both our digital audience and in-person audience, for the next session with Simon Lundy on his book, Race for Tomorrow. It will begin very shortly.